The rifle bucked against Cordelia's shoulder as she fired blindly into the darkness, her calloused hands trembling as the wolves circled her makeshift camp. The fire had died to embers, and her two young children huddled behind her, their whimpers barely audible above the snarling that grew closer with each passing moment. "Mama, I'm scared," whispered her 6-year-old daughter Primrose. "Stay behind me," Cordelia hissed, chambering another round with shaking fingers. 3 months since cholera had taken her husband Jeremiah, and now this wolves had followed, the scent of their meager supplies through the Colorado wilderness. Her homestead lay 2 days behind them, burned to ash by claim jumpers who'd waited like vultures for a widow's vulnerability. A massive gray wolf emerged from the shadows, lips pulled back to reveal yellowed fangs. Cordelia raised the rifle, knowing she had perhaps 2 shots remaining. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she calculated the distance, praying her aim would be true. The wolf tensed, preparing to leap. A war cry split the night air a sound that seemed to shake the very mountains. Something massive crashed through the underbrush with the force of an avalanche. The wolf yelped and scattered with its pack as a towering figure materialized from the darkness. Cordelia's breath caught. The man, if man, he was stood nearly 7 feet tall, his shoulders broad as an ox yoke. Copper skin gleamed in the dying firelight, stretched over muscles that spoke of a lifetime hunting these very mountains. Long black hair fell past his shoulders, adorned with eagle feathers and bone beads. War paint streaked his angular face, and his dark eyes held the intensity of a summer storm. He was Apache, and by every story she'd heard in town, she and her children should already be dead. Instead, he raised one massive hand, palm outward. "Don't be afraid," his deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You are safe with me." 8-year-old Beauregard pressed closer to his mother's back. "Mama?" The Apache warrior's gaze shifted to the children, and something softened in those storm-dark eyes. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, stepping carefully around their scattered belongings to feed dry branches to the dying fire. The flames leaped higher, casting dancing shadows across his painted features. "Wolves will not return tonight," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "They know Kestasa is here." "Kestasa?" Cordelia managed, still gripping the rifle, though some instinct told her it was no longer needed. "It means one who strikes like lightning," he explained, settling cross-legged across the fire from them. Even seated, he commanded the space like a mountain peak dominates the horizon. "Your fire was dying. Your scent carries fear 3 miles downwind. Wolves smell weakness like buzzards smell death." Cordelia's jaw tightened. "We're not weak." Those dark eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. "No," he agreed after a long moment. "Not weak. Broken, perhaps, but not weak." He gestured too. Their few possessions scattered about the camp. "You run from something." It wasn't a question. Cordelia found herself unable to look away from his penetrating stare, as if he could read the story of her recent tragedies written across her soul. The claim jumpers, the burned cabin, the desperate flight into wilderness with nothing but the clothes on their backs and what supplies they could carry. "My husband died," she said simply. "Men came for our land," Kestasa nodded slowly. "And now you wander the mountains with little ones. Where do you go?" "West," Cordelia replied, though she had no clear destination in mind. "Away from here. West is big," the Apache observed. "Many ways to die between here and there." The fire crackled between them, and Cordelia realized this strange, massive warrior could kill them all as easily as breathing, yet something in his presence calmed her racing heart. Her children had stopped whimpering, though they remained pressed against her back like frightened rabbits. Dawn painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold when Cordelia woke to find Kestasa gone, as if he'd been nothing more than a fever dream. but the fire burned bright and warm, recently fed, and 3 freshly cleaned rabbits hung from a makeshift spit beside it. "Mama, where's the big man?" Primrose asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Before Cordelia could answer, the underbrush rustled, and Kestasa emerged carrying an armload of firewood and what appeared to be medicinal plants. In daylight, he seemed even more imposing, well over 6 feet of corded muscle and contained power. Intricate tattoos covered his arms and chest, telling stories she couldn't read. "You cook," he said simply, gesturing to the rabbits. "Children need food." Cordelia bristled at his commanding tone, but her empty stomach argued against pride. "I can provide for my own children." "With what?" Kestasa's dark eyes swept over their meager supplies. "Your powder is wet. Your food will last 2 days, maybe 3 if you stretch it thin. Winter comes early in these mountains." The truth of his words stung because they were undeniable. Cordelia had fled in such haste that proper planning was impossible. They were indeed desperate, and this stranger, this Apache warrior who should be their enemy, was offering help. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why help us?" Kestasa was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke while arranging. "Stones around the fire. 3 summers ago, my wife and son traveled these mountains. White men with badges found them. They did not come home." The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Cordelia felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry. Your people see mine as savage," he continued. "My people see yours as destroyers. But children—" He looked at Beauregard and Primrose, who watched him with wide eyes. "Children are just children. They do not choose the color of their skin or the sins of their fathers." As if summoned by his words, Beauregard stepped forward with the boldness that only 8-year-old boys possessed. "Are you really an Apache brave, Beauregard?" Cordelia gasped, but Kestasa smiled, the first time she'd seen warmth crack his stoic expression. "I am Chiricahua Apache," he confirmed. "My people are the mountain people. These peaks are our bones. These streams are blood. Can you teach me to track animals?" the boy asked eagerly. "Oh, we can't impose," Cordelia began, but Kestasa held up a hand. "The boy should learn to read the mountain's language," he said. "His father is gone. Someone must teach him to be a man." Something in his tone made Cordelia's chest ache. This fearsome warrior, this supposed savage, spoke of her son with more paternal concern than most white men had shown. "We're not staying," she said quietly. "We're heading to California." "California is far," Kestasa observed. "Many dangers between here and there. Hostile tribes who do not know you are under Chiricahua protection. White men who would do worse than steal your land." His gaze fell meaningfully to Primrose. "A beautiful woman traveling alone with children... It invites trouble." Heat flushed Cordelia's cheeks, both from his words and the way he'd called her beautiful so matter-of-factly. "What are you suggesting?" "I know these mountains better than any man alive," he said. "Every water source, every safe passage, every place where enemies might hide. I could guide you safely to the territories beyond." "In exchange for what?" Cordelia asked suspiciously. Her experience with men had taught her that generosity always came with a price. Kestasa's expression grew serious. "I ask for nothing you are not willing to give. But know this, if you travel under my protection, you follow my commands without question. In these mountains, hesitation means death." Cordelia studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. Instead, she saw only fierce honesty and a strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. Still, accepting help from an Apache warrior would be madness by any civilized standard. "The rabbits are burning," Kestasa said mildly. She turned quickly to rescue their breakfast, her mind churning. Behind her, she heard him begin teaching Beauregard how to identify animal tracks in the soft earth, his deep voice patient and kind. This was not the savage monster of frontier stories. This was a man who understood loss and chose compassion despite his own grief. Perhaps madness was exactly what they needed. "You're insane if you think I'm letting my children travel with that." "Savage," Cordelia muttered to herself as she watched Castassa demonstrate how to read wind direction to Beauregard. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they rang hollow. The Apache warrior had shown more genuine care for her son in one morning than most men showed their own blood. "He's teaching me about the mountain spirits," Beauregard called excitedly. "Did you know eagles carry messages between the living and the dead?" "That's just superstition," Cordelia replied automatically, though she noticed how her son's eyes had brightened for the first time since his father's death. The boy needed a strong male figure, and despite everything she'd been taught about his people, Castassa possessed an undeniable nobility. "Mama, look what he made me." Primrose ran over clutching a small doll woven from grass and decorated with tiny wildflowers. "He said it will protect me from bad dreams." Cordelia's resolve wavered further. This fearsome warrior, this man who could snap necks with his bare hands, had spent precious time crafting a toy for her frightened daughter. What kind of monster did such things? "We need to talk," she said to Castassa once the children were occupied with their lessons in mountain lore. He rose fluidly and followed her to a boulder overlooking the valley below. The morning sun caught the copper highlights in his skin, and Cordelia found herself momentarily distracted by the way his muscles moved beneath intricate tattoos. "You have questions," he said simply. "I have 100 questions," she admitted. "But mostly I need to know why you're really doing this. Men don't risk their lives for strangers without reason." Castassa was quiet for a long moment, his dark gaze fixed on the distant peaks. "When my wife died, something inside me died with her. I stopped caring about tomorrow, stopped believing in anything beyond revenge. I would have died gladly in battle, joining her in the spirit world." His honesty was startling in its rawness. "What changed?" "You did." He looked at her then, and she saw depths of pain that mirrored her own. "Watching you fight those wolves, seeing you try to protect your children with nothing but courage, it reminded me that there is still honor in protecting the innocent. Your strength awakened something I thought was lost forever." Cordelia's breath caught. "I'm not strong. I'm terrified every moment of every day." "Courage is not the absence of fear," Castassa said. "It is acting despite fear. You are braver than any warrior I have known." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. When had anyone last spoken to her with such respect? Jeremiah had. Loved her, yes, but he'd also treated her like fragile porcelain that might shatter at any moment. This Apache warrior saw her as an equal, a fighter worthy of admiration. "If I accept your help," she said slowly, "what happens when we reach California? Do you just disappear back into these mountains?" Something flickered in his expression, hope, perhaps, or longing. "That would be your choice to make." The implications of his words sent heat spiraling through her belly. "Kestsa ... I know what you are thinking," he interrupted. "A white woman and an Apache warrior, it is forbidden by both our peoples. But in these mountains, far from the judgment of others, perhaps we could find something worth fighting for." "You're talking about scandal," Cordelia whispered. "About losing everything." "What is everything?" he challenged. "A society that would see you starve rather than accept help from the wrong people? That would condemn your children to death. Because of their mother's choices?" His voice grew passionate. "I offer you protection, guidance, and something more if you want it. What does your civilized world offer except hunger and fear?" Cordelia looked back at her children, who were laughing. as Kostasa showed them how to weave grass into rope. They looked happy, truly happy, for the first time since their father's death. And she? When had she last felt the stirring of desire that this man's presence awakened in her? The territorial governor in California, she said carefully. He might not look kindly on a woman who traveled with Apache protection. Then we tell him you hired a half-breed scout, Kostasa replied pragmatically. I can pass for Mexican or Cherokee if needed. Not all truths need to be shared with small men who would not understand them. His willingness to compromise, to protect her reputation even at the cost of his own pride, touched something deep inside her. This was not the inflexible savage of frontier mythology. This was a man capable of adaptation and sacrifice. How long would the journey take? She asked, surprised to hear the question leave her lips. 6 weeks, maybe 8 if we travel carefully. His dark eyes searched her face. Long enough to know if what I feel growing between us is real or simply the madness of grief and loneliness. Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs. Was she really considering this? Traveling alone through the wilderness with an Apache warrior? Allowing herself to feel things that proper widows shouldn't feel? All right, she said before she could lose her nerve. We'll try it. But I need your word that my children's safety comes before everything else. You have it, Kostasa said solemnly. I swear by the spirits of my ancestors that no harm will come to them while I draw breath. As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Cordelia couldn't ignore the electricity that sparked between their joined palms or the voice in her head, whispering that she was about to embark on more than just a journey across dangerous terrain. 3 days into their journey, Cordelia began to understand why frontier stories painted the Apache as supernatural beings. Kostasa moved through the wilderness like he was part of it, reading signs invisible to her eyes and finding paths where none seemed to exist. He led them along hidden game trails that avoided both hostile territories and the main routes where desperate men might prey on travelers. How do you know where you're going? She asked as they made camp beside a crystal stream she never would have found on her own. The mountain tells me, he replied simply, gathering stones for their fire ring. Water always flows downhill, animals always choose the easiest path, and the wind carries stories if you know how to listen. Beauregard hung on his every word, absorbing lessons in survival that no school could teach. Can you show me how to catch fish with just my hands? Tomorrow, Kostasa promised. Tonight we rest and your mother needs to tend her feet. Cordelia glanced down at her worn boots, surprised he'd noticed her limp. The leather was cracked and thin, ill-suited for mountain travel. They're fine. They are not fine, he said firmly. Infection in the wilderness kills as surely as bullets. Sit. His commanding tone rankled her independent spirit, but the throbbing in her feet convinced her to comply. To her amazement, Kostasa knelt before her and began unlacing her boots with gentle efficiency. I can do that myself, she protested, acutely aware of the intimacy of his actions. Be still, he murmured, his large hands surprisingly tender as they examined her blistered feet. You have walked farther than these boots were meant to go. Heat flushed through her body as his calloused fingers traced the contours of her feet, checking for signs of serious damage. No man had touched her so carefully since Jeremir's death, and the sensation sent unexpected tremors up her spine. The damage is not severe, he announced, reaching for his medicine pouch. But you need proper footwear for mountain travel. I don't have money for new boots, Cordelia admitted reluctantly. I did not ask for money. Kostasa began applying a cooling salve to her blisters, his touch professional yet oddly sensual. I will make you moccasins. They will serve you better than white man's leather in this terrain. You know how to make shoes? Apache women traditionally make such things, he said with a slight smile. But a warrior who cannot care for himself becomes a burden to his people. I learned many skills that might surprise you." As he worked, wrapping her feet in soft strips of cloth, Cordelia found herself studying his face in the firelight. The war paint was gone now, revealing features that were both fierce and handsome. His nose was strong and straight, his jaw carved from granite, and his dark eyes held depths she was only beginning to fathom. "Why aren't you married?" she asked impulsively, then flushed at her own boldness. "I was," he replied without pausing in his ministrations. "Ayana was the daughter of our medicine man. Beautiful, gentle, skilled in all the women's arts." His voice grew soft with memory. "She gave me a son, Nalnush. He would be 10 winters now. What happened to them?" Kastaza's hands stilled on her feet. "They traveled to trade with a neighboring band. Cavalry found them. The soldiers claimed they were hostile, but Ayana carried no weapons except her sewing kit, and my son was only 7 winters old." His voice hardened. "I found their bodies 3 days later." Cordelia's heart ached for his loss. "I'm sorry. For 2 years I lived only for vengeance," he continued, resuming his careful treatment of her feet. "I painted myself for war and tracked those soldiers across 3 territories. When I finally caught them, I learned that killing them did not bring my family back. It only made the emptiness larger." "Is that when you decided to help us?" "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "I decided to help you when I saw you willing to die for your children. Ayana would have done the same. In protecting you, I honor her memory." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," he agreed. "But she is gone. And you are here. Grief is meant to teach us to value life more deeply, not to stop us from living altogether." His words carried weight that went beyond mere conversation. Cordelia realized they were talking about more than just loss. They were talking about the possibility of healing, of finding something worth protecting again. "Mama, are you and Kestasa going to get married?" Primrose asked innocently from across the fire where she'd been playing with her grass doll. "Primrose!" Cordelia gasped, mortified, but Kestasa chuckled, a rich sound that warmed her more than the flames. "Your daughter asks the questions that matter," he said. "Perhaps we should consider her wisdom." "You can't be serious," Cordelia whispered, though her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. "Can't I?" He finished bandaging her feet and sat back on his heels, studying her face. "Your husband is dead, my wife is dead. Your children need a father," and double quotes. He paused as if searching for words. "I have found something in your courage that I thought was lost forever. Why should we pretend otherwise?" Before she could answer, a wolf howled somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp. Kestasa was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the knife at his belt. But instead of alarm, his expression showed only mild interest. "Different pack," he said, relaxing. "They sing of successful hunting. We are safe here." As he settled back down beside the fire, Cordelia marveled at how completely she'd come to trust his judgment. In less than a week, this Apache warrior had become the steadiest thing in her chaotic world, and perhaps something much more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. By the second week of their journey, Cordelia realized she was falling in love with a man who shouldn't exist in her ordered world. Kestasa never spoke of his feelings directly, but his actions painted a clear picture of growing devotion. He gave her the warmest spot by the fire each night, saved the best portions of meat for her and the children, and found reasons to touch her hand when teaching her to identify edible plants. More telling was how he'd begun including her in decisions about their route and timing, treating her as a partner rather than a burden to be protected. When they encountered a flooded creek that forced a detour, he asked for her opinion on which direction to take. When supplies ran low, he consulted with her about rationing rather than simply making pronouncements. "You trust my judgment," she observed one evening as they planned the next day's travel. "Should I not?" he replied, genuine surprise in his voice. "You are intelligent, practical, and you know your children's needs better than anyone. Why would I make choices without your wisdom?" Such respect was intoxicating after years of marriage to a man who'd meant well but treated her like a decorative flower. Jeremiah had loved her dearly, but he'd never truly seen her as an equal partner capable of sharing life's heavier burdens. The children, meanwhile, had blossomed under Kestasa's patient guidance. Beauregard could now identify animal tracks, find water by reading the landscape, and move through the forest with surprising stealth. Primrose had learned to weave grass into useful items and could spot medicinal plants that Kestasa had taught her to recognize. "They'll be better prepared for frontier life than most adults," Cordelia commented as she watched her daughter successfully start a fire using techniques the Apache warrior had taught her. "Life is harsh in untamed places," Kestasa agreed. "Children who learn early to be strong survive to have children of their own." There was something prophetic in his words that made her pulse quicken. Was he thinking of a future where her children might be his children? Where they might raise a family together in some remote place where the judgment of civilized society couldn't reach them? That night, as they made camp in a sheltered grove, tension that had been building for days finally reached a breaking point. Cordelia was mending a tear in Beauregard's shirt when Kestasa emerged from the stream where he'd been washing. Water droplets caught the firelight on his bronze skin, and she found herself staring openly at the play of muscles across his broad chest. "You are staring," he observed with amusement, settling beside the fire to let the warmth dry his hair. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, focusing intently on her needlework. "Do not apologize for seeing what pleases you," he said quietly. "I find myself watching you as well." The admission sent heat spiraling through her belly. "Kestasa, the children sleep," he continued, nodding toward where Beauregard and Primrose lay wrapped in their blankets. "We can speak freely." Cordelia set down her mending with trembling hands. "What are we doing?" "We are discovering whether two wounded hearts can heal together," he replied simply. "Unless you wish me to stop." "I should wish you to stop," she whispered. "I should be scandalized by these feelings. I'm a respectable widow, and you single quotes . Apache," he finished when she hesitated. "The enemy of your people." "Not my enemy," she said firmly. "Never that, but the world won't understand." "The world rarely understands anything worth having," Kestasa replied. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of mountain water on his skin. In Apache tradition, when a woman's husband dies, she may choose another, if her heart calls to him. There is no shame in seeking happiness after grief. "And if my heart is calling?" she asked breathlessly. Instead of answering with words, he reached out to cup her face in his large hands. His thumbs traced the lines. That worry had carved beside her eyes, and his touch was reverent, as if she were something precious beyond measure. "Then answer its call," he murmured, leaning closer until his breath warmed her lips. When he kissed her, it was with a passion held carefully in check, a storm contained but not diminished. Cordelia felt herself melting against him, her hands fisting in his long hair as she kissed him back with desperate hunger. It had been so long since she'd felt desired, so long since she'd allowed herself to want anything beyond mere survival. "Cordelia," he breathed against her mouth, and her name sounded like a prayer in his deep voice. "The children," she whispered, though she made no move to pull away. "Will not wake unless danger threatens," he assured her. "I would know." His confidence in his own abilities should have seemed arrogant, but she'd seen enough of his skills to trust his judgment completely. When he drew her closer, she went willingly, reveling in the solid warmth of his embrace. "I want this," she admitted against his throat. "I want you. But I'm terrified of what it means." "It means we are alive," Kestasa replied, his hand stroking through her hair. "It means we choose hope over despair, love over loneliness. What else matters?" When he laid her back on his soft deerskin blanket, Cordelia felt the last of her resistance crumble. Tomorrow she would worry about consequences and complications. Tonight, under the vast mountain sky, she would simply be a woman cherishing the touch of a man who saw her true worth. As passion claimed them both, the mountain wind sang through the pines like a blessing, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled their approval of the wild love blooming between two lost souls who had finally found their way home to each other. The morning after their first night as lovers, Cordelia expected awkwardness or regret. Instead, she found herself wrapped in Kestasa's powerful arms, feeling safer and more complete than she had in years. The guilt she'd expected was notably absent, replaced by a deep sense of rightness that defied all conventional wisdom. "No regrets?" he asked quietly, his voice rumbling through the chest beneath her cheek. "None," she replied honestly, surprised by her own certainty. "Should there be?" "Not unless you create them," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "What we have found together is rare and precious. To regret such a gift would be foolish." They were forced to dress quickly when the children stirred, but throughout the day, Cordelia caught Kestasa watching her with new warmth in his dark eyes. He found excuses to touch her hand when helping her over difficult terrain, and twice she caught him smiling at her with such tender affection that her heart skipped beats. "You look different today, Mama," Primrose observed as they stopped for their midday rest. "Happier. Do I?" Cordelia asked, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I suppose I am happy. We're safe, we're together, and we're heading toward a new life." "Because of Kestasa," Beauregard added matter-of-factly. "He makes you smile the way Papa used to." The simple observation from her 8-year-old son carried more wisdom than years of adult reasoning. Yes, Kestasa made her feel the way Jeremiah once had cherished, protected, desired. But there was something more, something that spoke to parts of her soul she'd never fully explored. With Jeremiah, she'd been a proper wife, dutiful and supportive, but always conscious of social expectations. With Kestasa, she felt wild and free, capable of anything. He saw her not as a delicate flower to be sheltered, but as a fierce woman worthy of standing beside him as an equal partner. That afternoon, they encountered their first serious danger since beginning the journey together. A group of 4 men on horseback blocked the narrow trail ahead, rough-looking individuals with the hollow-eyed desperation of claim jumpers and, worse, well, called their leader, a bearded man with cruel eyes and a sheriff's badge that looked suspiciously new. "What have we here? A squaw man and his woman?" Kestasa's hand moved subtly to his knife, but his voice remained calm. "We seek no trouble. Let us pass in peace." "Peace?" The man laughed harshly. "You got any idea what white women fetch in the mining camps, Breed? And those children? Hell, there's folks who'd pay good money for healthy workers." Ice formed in Cordelia's veins. These men meant to kidnap her children, to sell them into God knew what kind of slavery. Beside her, she felt Kestasa's entire body coil like a spring under terrible tension. "Run," he said quietly without turning his head. "Take the children up the rocks behind us." "Do not look back. I'm not leaving you," Cordelia hissed. "You will. If you love me," he replied, steel entering his voice. "Protect our children. That is your task now. Our children." The words sent strength flooding through her limbs. These men threatened her family, not just her biological children, but the new family she and Kestasa were building together. "Come on, sweethearts," she said calmly to Beauregard and Primrose, taking their hands. "We're going to climb up to those pretty rocks." "But what about—" Beauregard began. "Kestasa will handle the bad men," Cordelia said with more confidence. And she felt, trust him. As they scrambled up the rocky slope behind them, Cordelia heard the confrontation begin in earnest. The fake sheriff was demanding Kestasa surrender his weapons, while the Apache warriors' responses grew shorter and more clipped, always a dangerous sign. She'd learned. From their position among the boulders, she watched in horrified fascination as Kestasa transformed from gentle protector to lethal predator in the span of heartbeats. When the four men tried to rush him simultaneously, he moved with liquid grace that seemed to defy physics. His knife found the first man's throat before the others could react. A thrown tomahawk dropped the second from his saddle. The third man got close enough to grapple with him, but Kestasa's superior size and strength ended that fight quickly with a sickening crack of breaking bones. The fake sheriff, now facing death alone, tried to run. Kestasa's third throwing knife caught him between the shoulder blades, and he pitched forward to lie still in the dusty trail. The entire fight had lasted less than 2 minutes. "Is it over?" Primrose whispered, clutching her grass doll tightly. "Yes, sweetheart," Cordelia replied, though her voice shook slightly. "We can go down now." Kestasa was calmly retrieving his weapons and searching the dead men's belongings when they rejoined him. His face showed no emotion, but Cordelia noticed his hands had a slight tremor as he cleaned his knife. "You're hurt," she said, noticing blood on his arm. "A scratch," he dismissed, but allowed her to examine the wound. It was shallow but would need attention. "Sit," she commanded, using the same firm tone he'd used with her. "Let me tend this." As she cleaned and bandaged the cut, Cordelia realized something fundamental had shifted between them. They had faced mortal danger together and emerged victorious. They were no longer two people traveling the same path, they were truly partners, bound by shared danger and mutual protection. "Thank you," she said quietly as she finished tying off the bandage. "For what?" "For protecting our family." Kestasa's eyes blazed with an emotion so intense it took her breath away. "Our family," he repeated, as if testing the sound of the words. "Yes, that is what we are now." 6 weeks after their journey began, they crested a final ridge and saw the sprawling valley that held their destination, the territorial capital where Cordelia hoped to start fresh. But as they looked down at the bustling settlement below, both fell silent, knowing their time together was about to face its greatest test. "Once we go down there, everything changes," Cordelia said softly. "It does not have to," Kestasa replied, though uncertainty flickered in his dark eyes for the first time since she'd known him. "But you must decide what kind of life you want for yourself and the children." The question had haunted her thoughts for days. In the wilderness, their love had seemed natural and right. But civilization brought complications, social expectations, legal restrictions, and the harsh reality that their union would be scandalous at best, dangerous at worst. "I know what I want," she said firmly. "The question is whether it's possible." "Tell." "Mame." Cordelia took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I want a life with you. Not hidden away in shame, but openly, proudly. I want Beauregard and Primrose to have you as a father, and I want ... double quotes." She paused, heat flooding her cheeks. "I want children. Of our own, if God wills it." Kestasa's face transformed with wonder and fierce joy. "Even knowing the cost?" "Especially knowing the cost," she replied. "Love worth having is worth fighting for." They made camp that night on the ridge, postponing their descent until morning. As the children slept, Kestasa produced something from his traveling pack, a necklace of intricate beadwork featuring symbols she didn't recognize. "In Apache tradition," he explained, fastening it around her neck, When a man wishes to claim a woman as his wife, he offers her a gift that represents his promise to protect and provide for her always. This belonged to my grandmother, the beadwork tells the story of a great love that lasted through many hardships. Cordelia's fingers traced the intricate patterns, feeling the weight of history and promise in the handcrafted piece. Are you asking me to marry you? I am asking you to bind your life to mine in the eyes of the spirits, he said solemnly. White man's law may not recognize our union, but the mountains have already blessed it. What matters more, a paper signed by strangers or vows spoken under the same stars that witnessed our first kiss? Both, Cordelia said practically, though her heart soared at his words. If we're going to build a life together, we need protection under the law as well as the blessing of the spirits. Kestasa nodded slowly. Then we find a way to have both. The next morning, they descended into the valley with a plan born of desperate hope. Kestasa had braided his hair and donned clothes that would help him pass for a Mexican or half-breed trader rather than a full-blooded Apache warrior. Cordelia wore her most respectable dress and carried papers, identifying her as a widow seeking to establish herself in the territory. Their first stop was the Office of Territorial Records, where a board clerk barely looked up from his ledgers. As Cordelia explained, she wished to file a claim for homestead land. You'll need a man to file for you, the clerk said dismissively. Widows can't hold land without a male guardian or new husband. I have a husband, Cordelia replied smoothly. This is Esteban Morales, my new spouse. We were wed by a traveling preacher 2 days ago. The clerk's eyes flicked to Kestasa, taking in his dark skin and foreign features. Mexican? Half Mexican, half Cherokee, Kestasa replied in perfect Spanish-accented English. I guide wagons through the mountains to make living for my new family. It was a plausible cover story, and the clerk seemed satisfied. Within an hour, they had filed claims for adjoining parcels of fertile land near a reliable water source, far enough from town to ensure privacy but close enough for Cordelia to eventually establish a teaching school if she chose. Their next stop was more delicate, finding a minister willing to perform a marriage ceremony without asking too many questions. After being turned away from 2 churches, they found salvation in an unlikely place, a circuit preacher named Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore, who ministered to the Mexican and mixed-blood families on the outskirts of town. Love is love, the elderly minister said simply after hearing their story. If God brought you together through trials and tribulations, who am I to question his plan? The ceremony was held that evening in the Reverend's small chapel, witnessed by a Mexican couple who served as their official witnesses. As Cordelia spoke her vows to the man she now knew as Esteban Morales in the eyes of the law, she felt no guilt about the deception. Names were just words. The man she was binding herself to was the same courageous, gentle, passionate warrior who had saved her life and won her heart. With this ring I thee wed, Kestasa said, slipping a simple gold band onto her finger. Where he'd acquired it, she didn't know and didn't ask. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, their kiss tasted of freedom and hope and the promise of years to come. Beauregard and Primrose cheered from the front pew, already calling their new stepfather Papa Esteban, with the easy acceptance of children who had found security at last. 3 months later, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Cordelia stood on the porch of their half-built cabin watching her husband teach their children to prepare for winter. Kestasa moved with the same fluid grace she'd first admired, but now there was contentment in his bearing that hadn't been there in the wilderness. Mrs. Morales? A voice called from the path leading to their homestead. Cordelia turned to see a well-dressed woman approaching on horseback. Mrs. Catherine Pemberton, wife of the territorial governor and leader of the local Ladies' Auxiliary Society. Good Afternoon, Cordelia replied cautiously, smoothing her apron. She and Kestasa had kept to themselves since settling on their land, but gossip traveled fast in small communities. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," Mrs. Pemberton said, dismounting gracefully. "I've come to extend an invitation." "Where?" "In desperate need of a school teacher for the children in this district, and I understand you have education and experience." "Some," Cordelia admitted. "I taught school back in Missouri before I married my first husband." "Excellent," Mrs. Pemberton beamed. "The position comes with a small salary and the gratitude of every parent in the territory. Your husband seems quite capable. I'm sure he can finish your cabin and establish his trading business while you're teaching." As they spoke, Cordelia caught sight of Kestasa watching from beside the barn he was constructing. Even at this distance, she could read the pride in his posture. He was proud of her accomplishments, proud to be married to a woman whose intelligence was valued by the community. "I accept," Cordelia said impulsively. "When would I start?" "Next Monday, if that suits you." The school meets in the church during the week. After Mrs. Pemberton left, Kestasa joined Cordelia on the porch, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched their children play in the golden afternoon light. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from that first morning, after they'd become lovers. "Only that we didn't find each other sooner," Cordelia replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Are you happy, my love? Truly happy?" "I am alive in ways I had forgotten were possible," he said simply. "Every morning I wake beside you is a gift I never expected to receive." As if summoned by their contentment, Primrose came running with exciting news. "Mama, Papa Esteban. Mrs. Hernandez says her cat had kittens and we can have one." "Can we, Papa?" Beauregard added, using the title that came as naturally to him now as breathing. "If your mother agrees," Kestasa said diplomatically, though Cordelia could hear the laughter in his voice. "One kitten," she conceded, smiling at their excitement. "But you must take full responsibility for caring for it." As the children ran off to debate names for their future pet, Cordelia felt a deep peace settle over her soul. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she married Jeremiah all those years ago, but it was the life her heart had always yearned for without knowing it. "I love you, Esteban Morales," she said softly, using his legal name but pouring all her passion into the words. "And I love you, Cordelia Morales," he replied, his accent carrying traces of his true heritage that only she was privileged to hear. "My brave, beautiful wife who chose love over fear." That night, as they lay entwined in their bed with the mountain wind singing lullabies outside their window, Cordelia placed Kestasa's hand over her still flat belly and shared the secret she'd been carrying for a week. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered. His intake of breath was sharp with wonder and joy. "Truly?" "Truly. Our child will be born in the spring when the wildflowers bloom." Kestasa pulled her closer, his voice thick with emotion when he spoke. "A child born of our love, raised in freedom, knowing both their parents' heritages. It is more than I ever dared dream." As sleep claimed them both, Cordelia smiled at the irony of her situation. She'd set out as a desperate widow fleeing with her children into an uncertain future. She'd found instead a love deeper than ocean depths, a partnership stronger than mountain stone, and a family bound not just by blood but by choice, courage, and the wild, untamable force of two hearts that had recognized their perfect match. In the distance, wolves howled their ancient songs to the star-filled sky, and Cordelia no longer heard them as harbingers of danger. Now they sang of wildness embraced, of love that refused to be tamed by convention, and of the fierce joy that came from choosing passion over propriety. She was exactly where she belonged, safe in the arms of the giant Apache warrior who had kept his promise to protect her, and who had given her something even more precious, a love worth fighting for. A family worth building, and a future bright with infinite possibility. The mountains had witnessed their beginning, blessed their union, and would guard their happiness for all the years to come. And in the growing warmth of her belly, new life stirred, a child who would inherit the best of both worlds and the courage to forge their own path through whatever wilderness life might offer.